Welcome back to Chapter 2 of George Orwell's 1984, as read by your host, David Krayden. This has been an exciting first day because we got a lot of comments from people like you who have been watching and listening. I want to make one thing clear. The reason we're not doing the whole thing on YouTube is that we can't, because it's not original content. So we began here, and we'll be talking about the book and the fact that I'm reading the book, but I can't go through the entire chapter on YouTube. You have to go to my Substack page, which is www.substack.com/David Krayden. Just small d, small k, all one word, David Krayden. And please, I invite you to please go to that page, support that page if you want to. If you can, I'd appreciate it. It's free right now. There's no paywall, but any support you can offer as a paid subscriber would be appreciated. It really would be. But you can listen to my reading the book from there. Well, I want to read a comment we got from Maureen Teresa, and this really blessed my heart because she said, "Thanks so much. I just purchased the audiobook of 1984, but I haven't begun to listen to it. I will listen to your podcast instead." Wow. Orwell sure hit the nail on the head with 1984. I bet our Canadian universities have blacklisted it. We know there is no debate in the universities anymore. It is sad how our young people have been brainwashed into believing that good is evil and evil is good. Do they even learn about the truth of history anymore? It seems not. Our politicians and our legacy news outlets lie about almost everything. They change history to suit themselves, it seems. This past decade has been like living in an alternate universe. Wow. Yeah. And that's echoes a lot of what I said yesterday, doesn't it? In terms of we are living in 1984. We might be living a bit in Brave New World by Aldous Huxley as well. Certainly the use of drugs and sex to placate and anesthetize the population is very much like Brave New World. But in terms of the political program that is actively seeking to cancel people, censor any news that is deemed disinformation or misinformation by the state, Orwell had it in spades. He understood exactly where things were going. And not with the dictatorships of the era, but with the democracies. Because if you recall, in chapter 1, Winston is living in London. He's in one of the oldest democracy on the earth, which has become a totalitarian state as part of this grand Oceania complex. And are we not living in the same thing, though? And you'll also notice in chapter 1 that we're introduced not only to Big Brother, but to the daily hate sessions, which are held in theaters where people watch the enemies of the state, watch visual things that are supposed to upset them, and they just vent their rage. Are we not living in that sort of society today as well? I mean, there is no political discourse that is not bordering on rage, that is not bordering on hate. The political discourse has deteriorated to that extent where people cannot discuss anything anymore. And they can't even imagine that somebody on the other side might have an idea or two that might be worth considering because they're the enemy and they're an object of hatred. And this is something else Orwell was very prescient about. He knew where this was going in terms of mobilizing people through hatred. And that's exactly what has happened in the intervening years. Never been a more hateful time. Just want to read a couple more comments. And we have one from Gail in Littletown 2504. I have been encouraging everyone I know for the past 4 years to read this book, 1984, as well as Animal Farm. It is so relevant to today. It is like the Trudeau government is following the book to govern. Yeah, well, exactly. The Trudeau government is all about making the past, any history it doesn't like disappear and reinventing history. So now Canada, which has been a strong democracy for centuries, even before we became a self-governing colony, or we had self-government, British North America was much more democratic than other parts of the world. And we have built on that tradition. But Trudeau wants to suggest that Canada has always been a terribly flawed state and has bought into this nonsense about Canada encouraging genocide. That Sir John A. Macdonald, our first prime minister, was genocidal towards First Nations people. And that's, of course, nonsense. It's a misappropriation of the word genocide. Trudeau, who won't even talk about what the Chinese are doing to the Uyghur people as genocide. He won't call that genocide, but he'll suggest that somehow Sir John A. Macdonald had a program of genocide against First Nations people, even though the First Nations people are still very much in evidence today. There was no program of genocide. But like in 1984, where the past is invented, and some things are forgotten, some things are deleted, other things are made up. That's exactly what's happening. And this woman has it perfectly stated here. Now, Florida Cat Lady writes to me, I'm so bummed we didn't make it through chapter 1. That's only as far as I've gotten by myself, laugh out loud. Well, we got to the end of chapter 1 on Substack, and that's what we're going to have to do. So if you want to keep following the book on Substack, I will keep reading. I'm doing chapter 2 today. And I want to say I am rediscovering this book because I haven't read it for a while. I've read it at least twice. And of course, I've been talking about 1984 for most of my life as a journalist and as somebody who was in military public affairs, who always strove to tell the truth. Yes, I did. Sometimes it wasn't easy. But ultimately, as an independent journalist, I think this is the place to be, to really tell the truth and to talk about truth. And this is what Orwell was all about. And Orwell was always an independent journalist, if you think about that for a minute. He worked for the BBC during the war, and a lot of people criticize him for that, but he thought the war was very important to fight. And despite all of the lies he had been told over the years that Britain was no different than Nazi Germany, when the war came, he decided Britain was a lot different than Nazi Germany. It had a good democratic tradition. It had a history of fair play. It had a history of respect for free speech. It had a history of respect for people that clearly the Axis powers did not possess to any degree. They did not respect any of these things. They killed people, much like the Soviet Union was doing, had been doing, and would be doing in the future. And Orwell exposed that too. Even though a lot of people on the left would not touch the Soviet Union, would not criticize Joe Stalin, would not dare to question the motives of this great socialist state. Orwell did, because he had courage, he had guts. And he was an independent journalist for most of his life, writing. And his column that ran for years was called As I Please. And that sums up the way Orwell wrote about everything. He spoke his mind. So we're going to be getting back to the book. Here it is. And it's a pleasure to read this to you. So here we go. We're going to start chapter 2 momentarily.